Springfield waits for a new mayor, and George Ryan stays in prison. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about things going on in state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it might affect you. I'm Bernie Schoeburg from the State Journal-Register. It's near the end of the year, a little lull in at least Springfield activity, but plenty to come soon, and got a couple of State House experts here to talk about it with us. Melissa Hahn is here. She's the State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Radio Network with 55 stations or so across Illinois. Welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you.
And Benjamin Yount, Bureau Chief for Illinois Statehouse News, a growing bureau at the State House, and Ben does radio, writes, video, the whole thing. Welcome back, Ben.
Thank you, Brian.
Sad news in Springfield, and I know it's been certainly the topic of conversation in Springfield, the death of Mayor Tim Davlin, which happened, they say self-inflicted. Looks like there's not a question about that, although there hasn't been an inquest yet. But Springfield City Council is in the process in this coming week of picking a new mayor. I guess set the mood. Not all of our viewers are in Springfield, but certainly this has been quite a blow to the community.
It was such a shock, I think, to everyone, because Tim Davlin was known as the kind of the popular guy, the guy who always had a smile on his face from his teenage years, and we all knew him as the guy who was more than happy to show up at pretty much any event and say some nice words, and he was a very positive leader in Springfield in terms of just always having a smile on his face, always saying hello to people. And so I think people were just so incredibly shocked that he took his own life. Not only do you have the severity of something like that, a city, the capital city of Illinois, losing its mayor, but because he apparently did it at his own hands, I think it just set the town reeling.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of who he was in public. That people don't like to think or didn't know or didn't want to press that there perhaps was this whole other side, that there something was going on, and what that something is will likely come out at some point. But I think it was such a shock, and it really does change the political landscape. And as we get a little bit further away from the shocking news of that day, those are the questions that are not coming out. He wasn't going to run for mayor, but now what does this do for the people who want to replace him? How does the current city council get through? It's been a number of years since I covered City Hall.
Their budget is now upon them, and it has to be passed within the next couple of months.
It's always been a place where a strong mayor almost dictated to the council at times. And I think one of the best lines, I have to give credit where it's due, Jim Leach wrote something online after the first meeting where they couldn't pick a replacement, that the Springfield City Council paid eternal homage to Tim Davlin by once again not being able to do anything without him, and they couldn't pick his replacement. So I think that
negative.
Now you move a little bit past the shock and the headline, the oh my gosh, I can't believe what happened, and they have to deal with the reality, the political reality, and the actual governmental reality. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens at the State House. The last thing that Tim Davlin really did in Springfield was very, very vocal on municipal pension reform.
Right, for police and fire pensions that were costing cities too much over time and becoming the budget
that
time
legislation
bombs.
Has yet to be signed, mainly because of opposition from the city of Chicago. But I wonder how this is going to play in with Governor Pat Quinn, what the governor will say then, if this legislation actually will be signed,
right,
and if it is not,
yeah.
Who then is going to pick up the mantle of this? But that put Tim Davlin in sort of a different sphere, because he was the local face for that legislation here at the Illinois Capitol.
Yeah, I remember when Tim Davlin got elected 8 years ago, and I wrote a column that, well, there's going to be more Republicans now on our officially nonpartisan city council, and he's a Democrat, so he'll have trouble getting things through. For all of his problems, they got a lot of things done, in particular building of a $500 million new power plant, which they needed because the older power plants are going to have emissions that are beyond standards in time. That was one particularly big thing. And even though he had many disagreements with people, I don't remember him being the kind to go around and personally trash those he was opposed to. So he did have that happy-go-lucky thing going for him. He was kind of a joker, and I did go to the funeral. His daughter Tara gave a beautiful remembrance of the nice things that they had said to each other in letters and in person. And it's just, and he's got one of these big old-time North End Springfield families, so everybody knows him. You'd go to a fundraiser, I would go to watch sometimes to see how politicians are doing, and people would be everywhere. And sometimes it didn't seem to matter what problems he was having, they were just there. So it's a big loss, and I think there's still, I know with myself and with a lot of other people, kind of disbelief that this could have happened. He had some financial problems that we knew of. There was, you know, a tax lien against his home that he had been contesting, and there was an estate he was in charge of that there was some unaccounted money, and we don't know exactly the details yet, but just a very, very sad time. Just to bring folks up to date, you know, the city council, there's some difference of opinion on if they must follow state law or the consent decree that formed our form of government some years ago, but the state law says it has to be another alderman that gets named to replace him. It looks like maybe that will be Mark Mahoney, who isn't running for another term. He is actually the clerk of the Illinois House, so he would, which is a full-time job as the session comes, and this is only until the April election, and maybe the May swearing in. But Mahoney has indicated a willingness to do this if people want him to, because he's not seeking re-election. He's got 4 children, all under the age of 8, and but he would take a leave of absence and then become mayor if the other aldermen are for that. Frank Coons is an alderman who's running for mayor, and he's kind of taken himself out of it and says he's for Mahoney. Frank Edwards is an alderman who's running for re-election. He would take it, but there's seems to be some feeling that people don't want somebody who will be on the ballot next time to be it. And then Jim Donellan is the executive assistant to the mayor, who has said he's willing to take it too, but that would have to be based on a determination that it doesn't have to be an alderman, which the city attorney thinks that would be okay, but we're not sure. So Springfield moves on, and there's still a green stripe in the street outside City Hall because the mayor often traveled to Ireland, was very proud of his Irish heritage, and the green stripe is what was always there during the St. Patrick's Day parade.
I think
downtown.
that will be the next. I think that will be the next day to mark this, and hopefully it'll be a day that everybody can put it behind them and move on. But yeah, I do expect something during the St. Patrick's Day parade. Hopefully it'll be something nice, and then move into the city elections and get on with the business of the city, because the business of the city is much like the business of the state, not really that good at this point.
Yeah, well, the mayor was, as are all mayors, somewhat of a lightning rod for comments and this and that, but people have been pretty nice, at least publicly, in the aftermath of all this, and I expect that to go on. There is other odd politician news, which isn't exactly policy, but George Ryan remains in prison for his conviction for the license that grew out of the licenses for bribes scandal. He's in federal prison, 6.5-year term. He's halfway through it. His wife, Laura Lynn, former First Lady, now of Kankakee, now has lung cancer, and only a matter of months apparently to live. And so the lawyers, I think including Jim Thompson, former governor, went back to federal court and asked Rebecca Pallmeyer, the judge, to have compassion for the family in a sense and release George Ryan early, and the judge issued a long statement, opinion, basically saying, we understand that it's difficult to be in prison. All kinds of people have that, but no, you have to serve your term, despite these other legal arguments too about if the convictions would actually hold up under changes in federal law about honest services. There have been some Supreme Court changes that are some of what George Ryan was in trouble for. Thoughts on that situation? It's obviously a difficult one. The
family of George Ryan, of course, crushed, although being very tactful about it in public, that he will not be coming home. But I think here is the problem when it comes to the public perception of this. We all understand that this has to do with an appeal of the honest services charge, and that who knows, eventually that could change his sentence. However, for the regular person, all they know is that George Ryan went to prison and wants to get out because his wife is sick. and gee, that would never happen for me. There are millions of people who have been in prison when their loved ones were dying, and none of them got out. So I think there's, I would like to think that the judge did this strictly on her opinion of the law. However, I can't tell you that she didn't take into consideration what a public outcry there would have been had George Ryan gotten out of prison, and people would have been livid because in their eyes, and I hear this from people in the grocery store, it's not fair that someone with a title of former governor and with a lot of money and with a high-powered lawyer like a former governor, Jim Thompson, could get out because somebody got sick.
My wife was furious when she heard that the judge said George Ryan had to stay in prison. And her words were, how is Rod Blagojevich walking free, and yet George Ryan can't get out to see his wife who is dying? And I think that my answer to that was, this is why they called it prison. This is why you don't break the law, because prison is no joke. It's not, hey, I got to be in at 10 o'clock and I don't get to watch cable TV. It's prison. Life goes on without you. That's the punishment of prison. So in one sense, yeah, you're completely right that that's why it's a sentence. You miss all of these things. Birthdays, Christmases, unfortunately you miss sometimes being with people in their last moments. But I think that because of the grandfatherly reputation that George Ryan now enjoys, so many years removed from that Willis accident, and the public anger that there is at Rod Blagojevich, people look at them and say, one guy is in jail.
Well, Rod hasn't been sentenced yet, and he is, he is convicted of one felony, and the trial will come again.
The facts get lost.
And I'm not arguing with your wife, you understand that. Yeah.
I can't win arguments against her. I doubt you could either. I mean, Rod Blagojevich is cutting pistachio commercials, and people see that.
People have to make a living.
And then they see George Ryan say, I just went out to spend the last couple of months with my wife, and a judge says no. But it's, I never thought they were going to get George Ryan on everything they did. I've been wrong about that case going all the way back to the trial. So, to weigh in on this. But I was not surprised. I don't think he ever will get out.
Well, he's got 3.5 years left.
But he's not going to get out early, and he is, it's very, very tough, and it's a very, very sad story.
Yeah, well, and of course, the president still has the opportunity to do this. I don't know if Barack Obama will do that. And he won't be right at the end of his term by the time Ryan gets out, because if he wins a second term, hey, we certainly don't know if that'll happen, although this last week makes it look like he's had a better chance, as President Obama had some successes. He'll be in office, but he would be in the middle of a second term when George Ryan's term ends. So very unusual for a president to issue a pardon to anyone.
I think
before the end of the president's term.
When you still had Denny Hastert, who was the Speaker of the House, and you had Dick Durbin, I think that was the window for any sort of action from Washington. And not even so much a pardon, but just to commute the sentence and let him out of prison. George is going to have to do 85% of his 6.5 years.
I remember one time I went to the executive mansion in Springfield when George Ryan was under the gun some from all of the charges flying around, and I think it was one of the days I have a column coming out, and Laura Lynn Ryan was at some event and said to me, "Were you good to George today?" And I said, we do what we do. I think people in Springfield would know that Laura Lynn was a nice person, very loyal to George and the family. George did some bad things. So you have to feel it. I think the job of a judge is difficult, but by the comments that you two make that I think reflect a lot of people, the law is the law as well, so it's a very difficult situation. That's why some of us don't want to be a judge. Okay.
True, absolutely.
Okay. Illinois loses a congressional seat with the new census figures coming out. I remember when there were 22 congressional seats, and there might have been more before that in Illinois in the U.S. House. And now we have 19, and it's going to go to 18. Starting, I guess, with the new map and with the 2012 election. How did this happen? What does this mean?
Illinois' population grew. It just didn't grow as fast as other states. And you look at the trends, it has been for the last 2 decades that the growth is really happening in the South and in the West. And the Midwest, I believe, as the Census Bureau leader said, that this is one of the first times where the Midwest just isn't as popular. And I think that just kind of puts
it in perspective. Does snow have anything to do with this?
No.
Well, it might.
Maybe for a few people, especially if they were moving south. But we had, what, 3.3% increase in population. It was 8.6% in 2000. We're obviously not growing as fast as other states. But the point is that a lot of other states grew a heck of a lot more. New York lost, what, two congressional seats. So, you know, we're not the worst off. We're still the 5th largest state. We still gained population, not enough to keep 19 seats.
Texas grew, and I think Texas picked up a handful of seats, I want to say.
And if I remember right, Nevada was a huge growth state.
You're seeing big growth in some states like Nevada that didn't have a lot of population. Now,
you know, air conditioning helps too, okay?
Yes.
It's amazing.
You can live there all year and not...
I think there was a perception that Illinois was somehow shrinking. It's not that we're shrinking,
right.
We're just not growing fast enough.
But certainly, go ahead.
We missed being whole by about 75,000 people. Now, which people those are that are being counted, that spins off into all sorts of other things. I think big picture what it means is that Bobby Schilling shouldn't get too comfortable in Washington, D.C.
He's the
newly elected 17th congressional Republican. I think
beat a popular Democrat,
Phil Hare.
Mm-hmm.
I think that his district is being viewed as one that is going to get either radically changed or carved up.
Yeah. Or it's been pointed out that he lives in Kelowna, just very near the 17th district, like about a mile outside it. And you can live in anywhere in Illinois and run in any district. But it might be easy for the Democrats are in control of doing the map under the new figures because they control the House, the Senate in Illinois, and the governor. And those are the people, the state officials, who draw not only the state legislative maps, but the federal maps. And there's also some new Republican congressmen up in the Chicago suburban region. What they could do is just draw districts that bring 2 Republicans together a couple of times. And so Schilling might have to run, you know, he lives actually reasonably close to a couple other Republicans, including Aaron Schock, the, you know, still youngest member of Congress, I think, even after this election, but, you know, kind of a national figure already. And then Don Manzullo, who's very, I think, popular in his area, at least who is in northwest Illinois. So you could find Republicans having to decide, am I going to run against another Republican? Yeah. Am I going to run for a district that's miles away from where I am? Or am I going to say 2 years is enough for me? And those choices are going to be imposed, I think, on some of the Republicans, possibly Bobby Schilling.
The Democrats, of course, will say that politics will not bear any part in this.
That's
we will
always
simply
the case.
look at the numbers. And for people who don't realize this, the block-by-block numbers, the detail won't come out until, I think, February is when they're starting to release that. So the remapping process can't start really in earnest until they have those detailed numbers, because they want to see where the migration is. You know, Chicago, Cook County and Chicago proper to the suburbs, et cetera. Downstate, I think we expect to have, you know, really no significant growth whatsoever. But I talked to Dawn Clark-Netsch, Barbara Flynn Curry, another lawmaker with 3 names.
Another liberal from Chicago with 3 names.
3 names. That always gets me. Barbara Flynn Curry said that she expects, and this is, you know, I think the spin, but still, she expects all of the 19 districts to be slightly redrawn.
Sure.
And of course, that's what they will say. But if you're in power, of course, you're going to make it better for your people, and, you know, pit a couple of Republicans against each other and make it easier for a Democrat to win.
Republicans won the 17th, the 14th, the 11th, and I want to say the 6th or the 8th, whatever Melissa Bean's old district was. So they won some seats that had been held by Democrats. There are more Republicans in the new Congress than there are in the outgoing Congress. So almost by default, a Republican is going to lose something somewhere because there are just simply more of them. The changes, the small changes that are going to come to the congressional districts are not nearly as important as the small changes that could come to legislative districts. And I think that's a reason why there are more new congressmen who are Republican than there are more new state representatives who are Republican. That the Democrats were able to use that sort of map advantage to hold on to their majority in the Illinois House. But I think that Republicans in Congress are going to lose in part because of their success, that they have so many more districts that could be carved up.
Yeah, you know, there was talk during the last legislative session. I think the League of Women Voters was on board, if I've got the do-gooder group correctly, I think I do. And a lot of Republicans aligned with them that Illinois should be more like Iowa, have a computer generate your districts, just make them square? Should people expect Illinois to ever do anything as simple as just carve up the state equally so that the districts are about equal in size?
Absolutely not.
And because?
Well, that takes all the politics out of it. Illinois is about politics. Politics is the big business in Illinois. I know statistically agriculture and food production is the big driver, but let's face it, politics is king in Illinois. So no, they're not going to make it harder to control seats.
I didn't mean to be a Pollyanna over in this chair.
No. Well, I think that's what a lot of people do say, though, is, hey, they should just do it this way because it's the right thing to do. It's just that never happens in Illinois.
We're not Wisconsin.
I wouldn't say never.
Iowa.
Never is absolute.
Well,
This idea of the best person with the best idea, that's not Illinois. And I think that people in Illinois have some sort of pride in that. Rightly or wrongly, they see that as being part of the state. You know, I always make the joke that I don't want some sort of matrix, a cold hard computer. I want to see the spark of humanity.
Well, we do have that, Ben.
The genius, the same design that helped paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I want to see that ingenuity in our political map.
I don't want to lie on my back that long. Okay. Let's move on to an issue, school reform. There's a lot of talk that there might be serious reforms. That, there have been, one of our colleagues, Scott Reeder, has written in the past how it's very difficult to fire a teacher under Illinois' tenure rules. There has been resistance in Illinois to charter schools. There seems to be a movement now for significant reform in schools that could improve some of these things, plus there's always a funding problem. Where is this going, and what are the unions saying?
I think the big question about reform, you have to look at it first from step back. They're taking a look, the legislature is taking a look at education reform, Medicaid reform, and workers' compensation reform. And they're doing it between the end of the veto session and the beginning of the lame duck session. Now, are they looking to change?
You mean the beginning of the next spring session?
The beginning of the lame duck session. In January 3rd.
Oh, January, okay. I see. This holiday period, yes.
This holiday period that they're taking it, and it's done very specifically for a reason. Now, do they want to change these at a fundamental policy level, or is this part of what is expected to be a huge push for a tax increase? I've talked with a number of Republicans who say if they could actually get reforms and get them signed by the governor on either Medicaid or workman's comp or education, then they can go back and face voters and say, yes, you know what? Some Republicans did put votes onto a tax increase. What that tax increase will include, we don't know yet. But if this is a reform that is part of a balance to solve the state's problems, I think you have to look at it from that standpoint. When you look at the individual issues, these are huge things that have taken years and haven't changed very much. Specifically with the education reform, the unions are not very happy about tenure reform. It would make it a little bit easier. Tenure wouldn't be such an absolute protection. The door was open when Illinois signed up to be part of Race to the Top, that you had to tie teacher performance and student performance. That was the small end of the wedge that opened this now. And so teachers are going to be tied to how their students perform. Unions aren't very happy about that. The unions testified at these hearings in Aurora that they are furious about these ideas that could change the education labor laws and make it slightly more difficult for a teachers union to go on strike. Ken Swanson, the head of the IEA,
well, that would include having the board ultimately approve it, right? The school board would have to say
school boards would have a little bit more power. Ken Swanson said it would essentially change collective bargaining to collective begging, if I remember the
And he's the head of the Illinois Education Association.
So while the education unions are angry about the idea of tenure reform, they are drawing a Maginot line over this idea of changing education labor law. And again, then you take it back to the big picture of what reforms are going to be and how's a package. But this happened in a similar situation with pension reform, that the unions who did not like that idea sort of were in mild opposition.
Well, and ultimately,
by the time they got together, it had rolled over them.
Because
and was already passed.
Yeah, that was one thing the legislature did last year, lowered future pension benefits for state workers and teachers too, right?
Yeah,
all over the state, and it all happened in one day. And so there is a fear that, yes, these leaders that we have, that everybody says are ineffective, can get something done, can get it done quickly, so we better prepare.
And I think Ben touched on this. The big picture is that this is going to be a year where the Democrats need Republican votes if they're going to get any of their proposals passed, whether it's pension borrowing, tax increase.
Right. And are we going to see a tax increase?
So, and that's where I'm going with this, is that, you know, the Democrats created these special committees to look at reform, and I think that is the olive branch to try to get some of these Republicans on. And Ben's right, the teacher reform, the education reform may just be in that ball, and because the budget is so bad, and lawmakers are looking at this as a snowball that's about to crush all of them in terms of a
pension
fiscal
costs
crisis.
in the future.
Well, right, I mean, we're looking at $15 billion maybe starting next year under. They need those Republican votes because they've proven for a couple of years that they can't do it with just Democrats.
Well, I think
reform is the way to get them
I
on.
do think it's interesting that, you know, Democrats, particularly Speaker Madigan of the House, has said we need Republican votes to pass a tax increase. I think there's a lot of Republicans, or at least some, with state facilities or state workers, significant portions of them in their districts, who want to vote for a tax increase. And if they were given an excuse, I think they may be able to break ranks.
Especially if they got workers' comp reform and other reforms.
Right. I'm going to, right, because that'll help give them the excuse. Just want to touch on the Chicago mayor's race, which is big news to all of us because it's a big city and it kind of is an economic engine of the state, and people love it or hate it, but it's there. Good entertainment. Rahm Emanuel, former congressman, former chief of staff to President Obama, looks like he's going to be able to be on the ballot. As we tape this show, the hearing officer has said, despite 20 or more objections to his petitions, he does live in the city of Chicago, he can stay on the ballot, and he's apparently polling the highest among the candidates. So
that hearing,
Mayor Rahm?
Yes, I think it's always been Mayor Rahm. It was always going to be Mayor Rahm. I think that hearing process, because you had just people off the street come in and they wanted to know what was in his basement and where his wife's wedding dress was, because they were so woohoo, it took away any seriousness of that hearing and it became a sideshow. And any real question as to whether or not he lived in the city was swept away with the crazies that walked in and demanded answers from him.
Okay, well, I think we have to end it there, and we will certainly watch that race as well as ones around here. Happy holidays to all. Thanks for watching. Thanks to Melissa Hahn and Benjamin Yount. I'm Bernie Schoeburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.
Thank you.